Tonight, let's settle in together. Let's let the room dim a little. Let the air soften, and let the world outside the walls grow quiet. Because the story we're wandering into isn't just any story in the Pokémon world. It's one of those rare tales that carries a kind of quiet weight. Gentle, tender, a little sad, but full of love in a way that settles into you slowly, like warm light. And if you're listening to this while trying to fall asleep, don't worry. You don't have to hold on to every word. Just let them drift around you. Let them move like slow rolling clouds, and let the night carry the pieces you want to keep. This is the story of Cubone and its mother, and everything that echoes between them. I remember the first time I ever saw a Cubone in the wild. Not in a Pokédex entry, not in a battle, not in a story whispered by hikers or trainers passing along a winding trail, but in the quiet hush of a late evening, when the sky had turned the colour of cooling embers and the wind carried that faint, earthy smell that comes just after the sun dips below the horizon. It stood alone on a ridge, small, still, and so quietly present that I almost walked past without noticing. Some Pokémon call attention to themselves by simply existing. Cubone does the opposite. It seems to fold itself inward, as if trying to take up as little space in the world as possible, as if trying not to disturb the very air around it. And yet, in that stillness, there's a gravity to it, a kind of soft pull that draws your heart without meaning to, like something inside you recognizes something inside it. Maybe that's why Cubone has stayed with me all this time, not as a creature of strength or rarity, but as a creature of emotion, which is funny in a way, in a world full of dragons, gods, beings who stretch dimensions like fabric, and creatures who could accidentally turn you into a tree if they sneeze incorrectly. You wouldn't think the smallest, saddest Pokémon would be the one that lingers in your memory long after the others fade, but Cubone does. It lingers because it feels real, not just in the way it battles or survives, but in the way it mourns, remembers, and learns to keep walking even when its heart is cracked. And maybe that's why this story is worth telling slowly, gently, in a way that lets you sit with it. Because the truth is, Cubone's story is not just about loss. It's about love so deep that it echoes long after its source is gone. You might think all Pokémon come into the world with some kind of sparkling adventure already unfolding before them. Eggs hatching in warm nests, parents nearby, communities ready to protect their young while they wobble into their first steps. For many species, that's true. A nest of Pidgey huddles under wings. A small group of Sandshrew curls together under the warm desert stones. Even Wurmple, vulnerable as they are, start life surrounded by leaves and sunlight. But Cubone's beginning is different, not because of anything tragic, at least not at first, but because its earliest memories are so intensely, completely focused on one thing: its mother. Marowak doesn't have a flock. It doesn't live in packs or herds or little clusters that scatter when danger comes. It lives alone, not lonely, just independently. It's the kind of Pokémon that doesn't seek out crowds or attention. It keeps to the quieter places of the world, the cliffs overlooking empty plains, the crags carved by generations of wind and rain, the groves where the trees lean a little closer together as if sharing secrets. That's where baby Cubone grows up, in a world shaped by quiet strength. Marowak, for all her fierceness in battle, is gentle in ways most people never see. She teaches by showing rather than commanding. She nudges her child toward water with soft touches of her bone club. She shelters it under her body when the wind turns sharp. She guides it through tall grass, not by tugging or dragging, but by walking just one small step ahead, glancing back to be sure the little one is still following. And Cubone follows. Always. Because in its eyes, Marowak is the entire world. The sun, the moon, the cliff it stands upon, the lullaby in the rustling grass. And maybe that's why the bond between them becomes so powerful, so defining, because for a brief time, they have only each other. The early days of Cubone's life are so ordinary, so beautifully mundane that you might not think twice about them. But that simplicity is exactly what makes them precious. Cubone learning how the wind smells before rain. Cubone pressing against its mother's side when frightened by a distant roar. Cubone watching Marowak crack open fruit or dig for roots, mimicking her movements with clumsy little paws. There's a moment, one I like to imagine happened countless times, when Cubone stumbles on uneven ground, trips over its own feet, or bumps its head on a low branch. And Marowak, instead of scolding, simply reaches down, scoops it close, and taps her bone gently against the earth in a rhythm that means, "I'm here. You're all right." Imagine being that small, held by something that strong, comforted in a language of taps and rhythms and soft, careful gestures. Imagine feeling completely safe. Sometimes I wonder if Pokémon remember those early moments the way we do. Do they know they were loved long before they understood the word? Do they carry echoes of warmth even after the world becomes colder? For Cubone, I think the answer is yes. Not just because of the sadness that comes later, but because of the depth of its grief. Grief, after all, is love with nowhere to go. And Cubone's grief is ocean deep. But before the sorrow, there was joy. There was a life. And that life unfolded across a landscape shaped by both beauty and danger. The wilds are never just one or the other. They're a shifting mixture of possibility. Even peaceful meadows hold shadows if you know where to look. Marowak knew. She always knew. Every rustle in the grass meant something. Every scent on the wind carried a message. Cubone didn't know any of this yet. It only knew that when its mother stiffened, or shifted her weight a certain way, or made that low, rumbling sound deep in her throat, something unseen was happening, something important, something it needed to pay attention to. And slowly, it learned. There's something almost poetic about watching a young Pokémon begin to understand the world through observation. Cubone studied the way Marowak angled her head when listening for distant footsteps. It noticed how she tapped her bone lightly against stone to test for hollows beneath the ground. It watched her sniff at plants, not randomly, but thoughtfully, as if each scent told a story only she could read. And Cubone, in its earnest little way, began to imitate those behaviors. Sometimes well, sometimes adorably poorly. Like the time it tried to tap a rock with a stick it found, misjudged the angle entirely, and bonked itself on the nose. Marowak paused, glanced down, and nudged its head gently with her bone. Just once, a soft tap of reassurance. A quiet, steady, "You are okay." They moved often, as many wild Pokémon do, never staying long enough to draw too much attention, never lingering so long that other territorial species began to feel threatened. Their home wasn't a single den or cave, but a looping territory of cliffs, groves, and grasslands. A place where Marowak knew every escape route, every hidden spring, every patch of soft earth perfect for resting. And Cubone followed, sometimes darting between its mother's legs, sometimes lagging behind to investigate a beetle or a shiny stone, sometimes climbing awkwardly onto Marowak's back when its legs grew tired, clinging to her with tiny hands that trusted her completely. Those were the good days, the golden ones. Days when danger was distant, when the wind smelled clean, when Cubone's world was nothing more than warm sunlight, rustling leaves, and the rhythmic sound of its mother tapping her bone in a soft, guiding beat. But the wild does not stay gentle forever, not for any creature. Sometimes danger arrives like a whisper, long before it becomes a threat. a scent on the breeze, a shift in the silence, a path of grass flattened in the wrong direction. Marowak felt those signs before Cubone ever could. One evening, when the sky had darkened just enough that the stars began peeking through, they approached a clearing they had visited many times before. Normally, it was quiet, just a wide, open space where wind swept across tall grass like waves. But that night, something was wrong. The air felt tight, still, too still. Marowak stopped, not suddenly, not dramatically, just with a subtle shift of her weight. Cubone bumped into her leg and looked up in confusion. Marowak raised her bone, pointing it toward the grass. A warning. Cubone froze. There was scents on the wind now, sharp, musky, predatory, the kind that made the back of your neck prickle. A pair of eyes glimmered in the grass. Then another, and another. A pack of mighty hyena, territorial, hungry, and emboldened by numbers. Marowak stepped forward, not aggressively, not foolishly, but firmly, drawing a line in the earth between danger and her child. Cubone pressed close behind her leg, trembling. Marowak tapped her bone against the ground once. "Stay behind me." The mighty hyena crept forward, their movements low and synchronized, their breaths hot clouds in the cooling air. They weren't attacking, not yet. They were testing, measuring the risk, deciding whether this lone mother and her small child were worth the effort. Marowak made herself look bigger, straightening her spine, raising her bone defensively, growling low in her chest. A sound that vibrated through the ground, through the grass, through Cubone's tiny ribs. For a moment, it worked. The mighty hyena hesitated. The pack leader circled, sniffed, took in Marowak's stance, the gleam of her bone weapon, the determined fire in her eyes. Then, it backed away. One by one, the others followed, melting into the shadows. Cubone didn't breathe until they were gone. It pressed itself against Marowak's leg again, and she lowered her head, nudging it gently. A silent message. You're safe. But Marowak knew. Threats like that didn't simply vanish. They shifted. They circled. They waited. And the wild wasn't the only danger living out there. Far worse things walked on two legs. Team Rocket didn't prowl the region constantly, not like in big cities or hotspots of rare Pokémon, but their influence stretched farther than most people realized. Poachers, smugglers, those who captured Pokémon for profit, not partnership. Those who saw Marowak not as a mother protecting her child, but as a rare catch worth chasing. There were whispers in the wind, the kind that Marowak understood even if Cubone didn't. Unfamiliar scents, heavy footprints, bits of metal left behind on trails where no human should have been. But Cubone was too young to understand, too young to notice the way its mother grew tenser with each passing day, too young to see the danger gathering around them like a tightening circle, and too young to know that their peaceful wandering life was reaching its final dawn. It's strange how tragedies often begin quietly, not with thunder or shouting or sharp, sudden catastrophe, but with small changes that barely register until the moment everything shifts. Sometimes the world ends with a roar, sometimes with a whisper. For Cubone, it happened at dusk. The world was painted in soft oranges and purples as the sun dipped low. Marowak led Cubone up a slope overlooking a valley they had crossed hundreds of times. A place familiar, safe, trusted. But tonight, as they reached the top, the wind carried not the scent of grass or earth. It carried smoke. Cubone lifted its head, sniffing, curious, unaware. Marowak stiffened instantly. Smoke meant fire. Fire meant danger. And not the kind that came from a wild Charizard's wings or a stray ember attack. This was the dry, choking smell of something burning where no flames should be. She nudged Cubone urgently. "Go down the slope. Now." Cubone hesitated. It didn't understand. The crack of a branch behind them made both turn. A figure stepped out. Not a Pokémon. A human. Dressed in black, wearing gloves, holding a stun baton, and he wasn't alone. Marowak snarled before the man even spoke. "Rare specimen," he muttered to the others. "Take the mother first." Everything happened at once. Marowak didn't wait. She lunged, not out of rage, but out of pure instinct, the kind that rises in a mother when her child is threatened. Her bone flashed in the dimming light as she swung, aiming to drive the humans back, to carve out enough space for Cubone to escape. But these weren't ordinary travelers. They were prepared. They had done this before. A net fired from somewhere behind the trees, weighted and reinforced with metal nodes that crackled with electricity. It struck Marowak mid-leap, wrapping around her body, sending jolts through her muscles. She roared, not in fear but fury, thrashing, trying to free herself. Cubone screamed. It had never heard its mother make a sound like that. Marowak staggered, but even through the electricity, she reached out, her paw jerking forward, urging Cubone to run. Cubone didn't. It couldn't. Its legs felt frozen, its body trembling, its mind screaming for its mother. Another human stepped forward. "Knock her out!" A stun baton crackled to life. Marowak struggled harder, managing to lift her bone just an inch, just enough to make the humans hesitate. But electricity surged again, stronger this time. Her body collapsed. For a moment, all sound vanished. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Cubone let out a tiny, broken whimper. Then the forest erupted. A wild raticate burst from the grass, startled by the commotion, its eyes glowing with aggression. One of the humans shouted, swinging his baton, missing as the raticate darted off. Another Pokémon, fearful, territorial, crashed through the brush, the air filled with chaos. In the confusion, Marowak moved, barely, weakly, but she moved. She wasn't unconscious, not yet. She forced her body upright, shaking, electricity still sparking across her limbs. The humans turned, startled. How is she still? Marowak didn't give them time to finish. She swung her bone. It hit the ground, sending a shockwave of raw, desperate force through the clearing. A bone meringue launched with the last reserves of her strength. It soared past the humans, curving through the air, striking a tree trunk and rebounding with a sharp crack. Not at them. At the ground near Cubone. A signal. Run. Cubone understood, but understanding didn't make moving easier. Its legs shook, its breath hitched in its throat. Its tiny claws dug into the dirt as if trying to root itself to the spot. Marowak's eyes met Cubone's, a soft, steady look. Go. The humans lunged for her, and Cubone ran. Its tiny feet pounded the dirt, its breaths sharp and frightened. Branches whipped against its body as it stumbled through the undergrowth. Behind it, the sounds of struggle grew louder, the crackle of electricity, the shouts of humans, the roar of a mother refusing to surrender. Cubone didn't look back. It couldn't, because if it did, it wouldn't be able to keep running. The world blurred around it. Leaves, dirt, shadows, the sound of its own heartbeat pounding against the inside of its skull. Its lungs burned, its legs ached, its vision swam, but it kept going, because running was all it had left. It didn't know how long it ran. Minutes? Hours? Time had dissolved into one long, trembling flight. But eventually, its body gave out. Cubone collapsed near a rocky outcrop, chest heaving, tears streaming silently down its face. Marowak was gone. Not because Cubone understood death, not yet, but because the world suddenly felt too big, too empty, too quiet. It curled into itself, tiny paws wrapped around its head, and it cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just soft, heartbreaking sobs that trembled through its whole body. That was the first night Cubone cried into the cold, pale moonlight, but not the last. The wild is not kind to a Pokémon alone, especially not one so young. But somehow, through desperation, instinct, and the faint echo of everything Marowak taught it, Cubone survived the night. When morning came, the world felt harsher, the sunlight too bright, the air too open. Cubone wandered the landscape without direction, following the faint traces of familiar scents. A broken twig here, a patch of disturbed grass there. It didn't understand tracking. But love has its own sense, its own compass. It searched. Hours passed. Then, something. Not her scent. Something else. Something metallic, bitter, wrong. Cubone followed it anyway. The air grew thick with smoke again. Not fresh this time, but lingering, the kind that clings to bark long after the flames have died. It climbed a small hill, its legs heavy, its breath unsteady. And there, at the base of a tree blackened by fire, something lay still, small, grey, familiar. Marowak. Cubone froze. The world narrowed to a single point. It stumbled forward, tiny feet dragging through ashes. It touched her arm, cold, still, gone. Something inside. Cubone shattered. A sound escaped its throat. Not a cry, not a scream, but something raw, almost primal. The sound of a heart breaking for the first time. And as the sun dipped behind the clouds, casting a pale light across the clearing, Cubone lifted its mother's skull. It pressed it to its face, not out of ritual, not out of instinct, out of longing, out of need, out of a love so deep it hurt. And that is how the mask was born. Not from tradition, but from grief. Grief so powerful it needed something to hold on to. Cubone curled beside its mother's still form, wearing the skull that would one day define its species. And it cried again, softly, continuously. That night, the world felt impossibly large, and Cubone felt impossibly small. Days passed, then weeks. Life did not pause to comfort the grieving. Predators still prowled, storms still rolled in, hunger still gnawed at Cubone's belly. But even through the exhaustion, even through the ache in its limbs and the trembling in its chest, Cubone kept moving. It carried the skull like a shield, like a memory, like the last piece of warmth it had left. And every night, under the moon's pale glow, Cubone cried, its tears slipping through the empty eye sockets, its sobs muffled by the bone. The world heard those cries. Trainers spoke of a ghostly wail echoing across the cliffs. Pokémon paused mid-hunt, ears twitching as the sound seeped through the wind. Some avoided it, uneasy. Others bowed their heads in quiet respect. Because grief recognizes grief, even in the wild. But Cubone's story didn't end there. Because grief, as heavy as it is, has a way of leading us towards the places we need to go. Even if those places are haunted, even if those places hold memories sharper than claws, even if those places whisper with voices that should not still exist. Cubone began walking toward Lavender Town, toward the tower, toward something waiting for it in the quiet, toward the ghost of love. Lavender Town wasn't a destination most Pokémon sought out. It wasn't a place of food-rich fields like the outskirts of Celadon, or of warm caves like those dotting the mountains near Pewter. Lavender was different, quiet in a way that felt heavy, still in a way that made even the wind seem hesitant to move. Humans said it was a place touched by spirits. Pokémon said it was a place where footsteps softened out of respect for those who no longer walked. Cubone didn't know any of that. It only knew that something, some instinct, some whisper carried on the breeze, drew it forward. Through meadows where doduos pecked half-interestedly at seeds. past small streams where pollywags hopped nervously into deeper water, past the edges of forests where beedrills stared from high branches, their eyes glowing with suspicion. Cubone walked alone, and the wild recognized something fragile, something wounded, something not to be touched. Even predators, sensing the strange mixture of grief and determination radiating off the tiny Pokémon, kept their distance. Perhaps instinct told them this one carried something sacred, or perhaps the world, cruel as it often is, sometimes knows when to step aside for a grieving heart. The closer Cubone got to Lavender Town, the more the air changed. It grew cooler, not in temperature, but in feeling. Like walking into a room where someone had just finished crying, quiet, tender, and thick with memories. The breeze carried scents of wilted flowers, burning incense, and old stone warmed by sunlight. Lavender Town itself was small, peaceful. Its houses painted in soft, muted colors that seemed designed not to disturb the gentle quiet that clung to the place like mist. Humans moved slowly here, softly, as if trying not to startle something unseen. And towering above everything, the Pokémon Tower. It rose like a monument, stretching into the pale lavender sky, its windows dark, its edges worn by time and grief, and countless stories whispered within its walls. Cubone stared up at it. It didn't know what this place was, but something inside it stirred, a recognition, a pull, a voice without sound. Go inside. So Cubone stepped forward. The entrance was open, always open, as if inviting the weary, the grieving, the restless. Inside, the air was different. Still, but not empty. Heavy, but not oppressive. The scent of incense hung like a veil, mingling with the faint smell of dust and stone. Columns lined the walls. Small alcoves held offerings, flowers, candles, trinkets left by trainers mourning their partners. Marble plaques bore names etched with trembling hands, and somewhere far above, a soft sound echoed. Footsteps, not human, not quite Pokémon, something in between, a spirit. Cubone climbed. Its tiny feet made almost no sound on the wooden steps. Each floor brought new layers of quiet, hushed prayers, whispers of trainers kneeling beside memorials, the faint flicker of candlelight reflecting off polished stone. Pokémon occasionally drifted through the air, ghastly with their swirling forms, Haunter flickering in and out of sight like mischievous shadows, their movements gentle out of respect for the space. Even they did not approach Cubone. They knew why it was here. Everyone did. Grief radiated from Cubone like a faint glow, a soft aura that even the spirits understood. Cubone continued to climb, floor after floor. Its breaths grew heavier, its legs trembled from days of wandering. But something pushed it onward, some instinctual belief that the thing it sought was at the top. And then, on one of the final floors, Cubone stopped. The air was different here, colder, heavier, charged with something unseen. It felt like the moment before a storm, silent, electric, expectant. Cubone stepped forward, and the world shifted, not dramatically, not with blinding light or roaring sound, but with a soft flicker, like a candle being encouraged by a gentle breath. A shape began to form. Wisps of light gathered near the far end of the room, swirling slowly, almost shyly. They twisted and curled like smoke in reverse, rising from the ground upward, gaining form, weight, presence. Cubone froze. It knew. Before the shape even finished forming, it knew. The light condensed, softened, shaped itself into something familiar. Someone familiar. Marowak. Or rather, what remained of her. Her spirit glowed faintly, like a warm lantern in fog. Her edges softened as if she were caught between this world and the next. She looked at Cubone, not with the blank stare of a ghost, but with the same eyes she had used to guide her child through the tall grass. Warm, loving, steady. Cubone's breath caught in its throat. It stepped forward, very slowly, very carefully, as if afraid the moment might break. The Marowak spirit lifted its bone, not as a weapon, as a gesture, a greeting, a hello. Cubone let out a tiny sound, part sob, part gasp, part the fragile voice of a heart that had been shattered and suddenly found one of its pieces returned. It reached out. Its paw trembled as it touched the spirit's bone. And somehow, despite the fact that nothing physical connected them, Cubone felt warmth, real warmth, its mother's warmth. Marowak's spirit leaned down, touching her forehead to Cubone's skull mask. A soft glow passed between them, a feeling more than a message. I'm here, I'm proud of you. You survived. Cubone's tears fell silently, soaking into the skull mask, trickling down its cheeks. It cried, not in the desperate way of before, but in the soft, trembling way of someone finally able to release a grief they've carried too long. The spirit wrapped its arms around Cubone, a hug made of memory and love. Cubone leaned into it with all its weight, letting its tiny body shake, letting the ache flow out, letting the moment fill every empty corner of its heart. Time didn't exist in that embrace. The tower felt suspended, quiet, sacred, holding its breath for a reunion it had seen countless times but never quite like this. Eventually, Marowak pulled back. She looked toward the stairs, toward the exit, toward the world. A gentle urging. You must keep going. Cubone shook its head. It didn't want to leave. Not again, not so soon. But Marowak touched Cubone's cheek, her spectral hand passing softly through the bone mask. Cubone felt it anyway. A warmth that settled deep. A love that said, I will always be with you. The spirit stepped back. Light began to gather around her. She was fading, returning to the place beyond. Cubone reached out. The spirit reached back. Their hands didn't quite meet, but they didn't need to. Cubone felt the message as clearly as if the words had been spoken aloud. Healing begins by walking forward. Marowak's spirit glowed brighter for a moment, one final flare of warmth, and then she was gone. The room fell silent again. Cubone stood perfectly still. Then, slowly, it took a breath, a deep one, steady, the first steady breath it had taken since the night everything changed. Cubone lowered its head, touched the skull mask with one paw, and began to walk down the tower steps. Not quickly, not with confidence, but with purpose. Something in Cubone had shifted, not erased the grief, but transformed it, softened it, turned pain into memory, loss into love. Cubone stepped outside the tower. The sunlight felt different, not as harsh, not as empty. Lavender Town's quiet now felt comforting rather than heavy. Cubone stood there for a long moment, breathing, feeling, becoming. Because healing doesn't happen all at once. It happens in breaths, in steps, in small quiet decisions to keep moving. And Cubone kept moving. In the days that followed, Cubone wandered without rushing. For the first time since losing Marowak, the world didn't feel like an endless maze of shadows. The path still felt lonely, yes, but not empty. Lavender Town had a way of wrapping itself gently around weary hearts, offering quiet places to sit, to breathe, to simply exist without being asked to be anything more. Sometimes Cubone sat by the river that wound past the edge of town, watching the water curl around stones smoothed by years of flow. Sometimes it wandered into the small patches of wildflowers that bloomed beyond the last row of houses, letting the petals brush against its tiny claws. Once, it even lingered near a pair of old women tending graves, listening to their soft voices retell stories of loved ones they missed. They didn't notice Cubone hiding behind a row of trimmed bushes, but even if they had, they wouldn't have chased it away. Lavender Town understood grief. It made space for it. Cubone didn't suddenly stop crying at night. Healing never moves that quickly. It still curled beneath trees or beside the riverbank and let tears fall quietly into the soil. But the cries changed. They weren't sharp, frantic wails anymore. They were softer, steadier, closer to the way rain falls on a calm night. Less pain, more release. Sometimes, when the wind blew just right, Cubone imagined it heard Marowak's footsteps. Not as a ghost, just as memory, the way you can sometimes feel the echo of someone you loved long after they're gone. A familiar rhythm in the ground, a whisper of warmth on your shoulder. Lavender Town wasn't a home, not really, but it was a place to rest, a pause, a breath. And when Cubone finally rose one morning and felt something inside say, "It's time to move on," it listened. The world was larger than its grief, larger than Lavender Town. And even though it felt nervous, tiny even, Cubone knew Marowak's spirit wouldn't have wanted it to stay forever in a town meant for remembering. She would have wanted her child to live. So Cubone left. It stepped onto the dirt road with its bone in hand, the skull mask feeling less like a weight and more like a companion. The sun stretched long beams of gold across the path, warming its shoulders. The sky was a soft blue, the kind that feels like a quiet invitation. And Cubone walked. It didn't know where it was going, but it knew why. Because walking was healing. Because moving was living. Because Marowak's spirit had told it, wordlessly, warmly, there was more ahead. As Cubone traveled, it encountered other Pokémon. Not many at first. And when it did, they kept their distance, unsure how to interpret the skull mask, unsure how to read the lingering sadness beneath it. But slowly, the world grew less cautious. One morning, as Cubone wandered through a sunlit clearing, a tiny oddish waddled up to it, curious. The oddish sniffed the air dramatically, then tilted its leaves as if asking a question. Cubone blinked. Oddish blinked back. For some reason, Cubone felt a tiny tug of amusement. It tapped the ground lightly with its bone. Oddish swayed happily. And just like that, a small friendship formed. They didn't travel together for long. Oddish eventually shuffled back to its patch of soft soil, but the moment mattered. It was the first time Cubone had felt something close to joy since before the tragedy. There were other encounters too. A cautious Pidgey who landed beside Cubone and pecked gently at stray seeds near its feet. A carefree Sentret who followed Cubone for nearly an hour, mimicking its steps until it got distracted by a berry bush. Even a bold Growlithe who approached with a wagging tail, sniffed Cubone curiously, then nudged a warm rock toward it as if offering a gift. Cubone didn't always react. Sometimes it stood quietly, unsure of what to do with kindness. But each moment chipped away at the lonely stone encasing its heart. Little by little, the world became less sharp. Little by little, Cubone began to see itself not as a shadow left behind, but as a small, brave creature with a story still unfolding. One evening, as Cubone settled beneath the branches of an old tree, it noticed something it hadn't before. Its tears had stopped coming so easily. Not because the grief was gone, it never fully leaves, but because something inside had grown strong enough to hold both love and loss at the same time. Cubone felt steady, maybe even hopeful. It didn't know that it was on the path toward becoming a Marowak, a Pokémon defined not only by its past, but by the strength that grows from enduring it. But evolution isn't just about levels, or battles, or time. Sometimes evolution begins in the heart, and Cubone's heart had begun to change. That night, something new stirred in the air. A warmth, a hum, a soft rush of energy that rippled from Cubone's chest to its fingertips. It startled, looking down as a faint glow pulsed beneath the skull mask. Evolution wasn't coming yet, not tonight, not this moment. But Cubone could feel something shifting inside, a quiet confidence, a flicker of power, a hint of the strength it would one day wield. The stars glimmered overhead. The wind carried the faint scent of distant mountains. Cubone looked toward the horizon, and for the first time since donning the skull mask, it took a step forward, not because it was running from pain, but because it was walking toward its future. The next stretch of Cubone's journey carried it farther than it had ever traveled before. Beyond the soft borders of Lavender Town, beyond the quiet patches of forest where low-level Pokémon grazed among fallen leaves, beyond the familiar rhythms of the life it once knew. The land here unfolded in long waves, rolling hills, stony ridges, valleys carved by rivers that had moved patiently through the earth for generations. Each new horizon felt like an invitation, and Cubone accepted. It walked for hours each day, stopping only when its small body demanded rest. Nights were still difficult. The world quiets in a way that stirs old memories, and Cubone often found itself curled beneath rock ledges or the hollow of an old log, feeling the weight of the skull mask press gently against its face. But instead of sinking into grief, Cubone found itself remembering the warmth beneath the sorrow, the way Marowak guided it with nudges, the rhythm of her bone tapping softly on the ground, the steady presence that made even the darkest nights safe. Those memories didn't hurt as sharply anymore. They felt like lanterns, little lights inside its chest. One morning, as the sun pushed its first pale rays across the hills, Cubone woke to a distant rumble. Not thunder, not footsteps, something steadier, more rhythmic. Cubone lifted its head, bone held close, ears twitching. A herd, Tauros, dozens of them. Their heavy hooves drummed against the earth as they thundered across the plain in a loose formation. Heads bowed as they charged towards something unseen. Dust rose behind them in thick clouds, and their roars echoed like deep rolling waves. Cubone watched from the ridge, awe flickering beneath its mask. The herd moved with such purpose, such coordinated power, that the very ground trembled. For a moment, Cubone felt small again, tiny, fragile, breakable. But then, something inside it shifted. It wasn't intimidated, not like before. It felt something else. Admiration, respect, even a flicker of longing. Tauros were everything Cubone wasn't. Fearless, fast, unstoppable. But they weren't born that way. They grew into it. They learned to move as one. They learned to charge through obstacles rather than around them. Cubone tightened its grip on its bone. It wanted that kind of strength, not to dominate, not to intimidate, but to stand tall in a world that once felt too big. When the herd passed, the ground settled and silence slowly returned. Cubone continued walking, and as it walked, it noticed something else. It wasn't flinching at every rustle in the bushes anymore. It wasn't freezing at every sudden noise. It was more alert, more grounded, more brave. Courage doesn't announce itself with trumpets. It grows quietly inside you, like roots weaving through soil. Cubone's courage was growing. The next test came unexpectedly. While crossing a narrow path between two rock walls, Cubone heard a low growl echoing from deeper within the canyon. A cold breeze rushed through the space, carrying the scent of something territorial, something large. Cubone paused. A mighty hyena emerged from the shadows. Not a pack, just one. But it was big, scarred, eyes sharp with hunger. Cubone's heart hammered, but it didn't run. Not this time. Instead, it raised its bone, small but steady. The mighty inner circled, studying this strange little Pokémon with a skull mask and trembling arms. Its growl deepened. Cubone exhaled shakily, not out of fear, out of focus. It remembered Marowak's stance, the firm grounding of her feet, the way she angled her body, the way she kept her bone close until the exact moment she needed it. Cubone mimicked her. The mighty hyena lunged. Cubone didn't close its eyes. It swung. The bone cracked sharply against the mighty hyena's snout, not enough to injure, but enough to stun. The predator recoiled, shaking its head, growling in surprise. Cubone stepped back, bone raised again. The mighty hyena stared. It saw something, not a helpless child, not prey, something tougher, something growing. After a long moment, the mighty hyena turned away, slipping back into the canyon shadows. Cubone stood perfectly still. Then, it breathed, a long, steady breath. And for the first time in its life, Cubone felt a spark, small, fragile, but real, of pride. It had protected itself. Not because it was fearless, but because it tried. And that was enough. That night, as Cubone curled beneath a starlit sky, it felt something warm flicker inside its chest again. The same hum of energy it had felt in Lavender Town. The same stirring of something waiting to unfold. Evolution wasn't a distant idea anymore. It was coming, quietly, patiently, like dawn. In the following days, Cubone discovered a new kind of strength. Not the strength to fight bigger opponents, but the strength to reach out, to trust even a little. It crossed paths with a travelling Fanpy who shared berries with it. It trekked beside a passing Geodude who grumbled at rocks in the way, smashing them aside without Cubone needing to lift a paw. Once, it even rode on the broad shell of a sleepy Torterra who wandered along the same route for half a morning. Healing doesn't erase the past. Healing adds to it, layer by layer, moment by moment. And with each gentle interaction, each tiny friendship, each brave step, Cubone's heart gathered new layers, soft ones, hopeful ones, ones that felt like green shoots growing from charred earth. One night, as Cubone settled on a cliff overlooking a vast plain, it watched the moon rise. The skull mask took on a soft glow under the pale light, its shadows stretching into the cracks and curves of the bone. Cubone ran a paw across the smooth surface. It didn't cry, not tonight. Instead, it whispered. A tiny sound, almost like a word. Maybe it wasn't a word. Maybe it was simply a feeling, a thank you, a promise, and I'm still here. The wind carried the sound away gently, and Cubone felt something settle in its heart. Soon, it would be ready, not tonight. But soon the small, trembling Pokémon who once cried into the moonlight would rise into the form it was always meant to become. A Marowak, not as a replacement, but as an evolution, a continuation of love. The journey would lead Cubone there, step by step. Days folded into each other like soft pages turning in a book, each one marking a quiet shift in Cubone's spirit. The little Pokémon had wandered far from the cliffs where its life began, far from the ashes of that dark night, far even from the shadowed stillness of Lavender Tower. Yet somehow, the farther it travelled, the more it carried the warmth of its mother with it, not as a weight, but as a guide. One morning, Cubone climbed a hill overlooking a wide stretch of land dotted with boulders and wildflower patches. Dew clung to the grass like tiny stars scattered across the earth, shimmering in the early light. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine from a distant forest. Cubone paused at the top, bone resting lightly against the ground. Something about this place felt calm, balanced, as if the world had exhaled here. A moment later, Cubone realized it wasn't alone. Across the open field, a small group of Machop was training together, punching at the air, lifting rocks twice their size, practicing careful footwork under the watchful eye of a larger Machoke. Their movements were sharp, purposeful, almost rhythmic. Cubone watched, mesmerized. Machop stumbled occasionally, but every time it did, the Machoke stepped forward, correcting its stance, steadying it, guiding it back into motion. There was no frustration, no harshness, just patience, discipline, care. Cubone felt something, stirred deep inside, something like yearning. Strength wasn't loud, it wasn't violent, it was steady, intentional, and Cubone wanted to learn. It stepped forward, timidly. The Machoke noticed immediately. For a moment, nothing moved. The Machop froze mid-punch. Even the breeze seemed to hesitate. Cubone lifted its bones slightly, not in challenge but in greeting. Machoke tilted its head. Then slowly, it nodded. Cubone took another step. What followed wasn't a formal lesson. Machoke didn't call Cubone over or bark instructions. Instead, it demonstrated. Quietly, patiently, knowing that Cubone would watch. And Cubone did. For hours. It watched how Machoke planted its feet, firm, grounded, unshakable. It studied the way Machop shifted its weight, pivoted its hips, exhaled at the exact moment its fist met the air. Eventually, Cubone tried. It swung its bone, not wildly, not fearfully, but with intent. The first swing was clumsy, the second, slightly better. The third, smoother. Machoke noticed. It stepped behind Cubone, gently nudging its elbow to adjust the angle. It tapped Cubone's foot to widen its stance. It guided its shoulders to relax. Cubone absorbed everything. Hours passed until the sun hung overhead, warm and bright. Cubone practiced again and again until its arms trembled from fatigue. Machoke gave a low grunt, an approving one, and gestured for Cubone to rest. Cubone sank onto the grass, breath coming in short pants. Machop plopped down beside it, offering a small berry with a proud grin. Cubone accepted. It tasted sweet, sweeter than anything had tasted in a long time. That day, something in Cubone shifted more deeply than ever before. Strength wasn't something it needed to have all at once. It was something built through effort, through patience, through guidance, through time. Cubone bowed to Machoke before leaving, an instinctive gesture of gratitude. Machoke bowed back. The sun drifted lower as Cubone continued its journey. Training became part of its routine. Not always with others, often, Cubone practiced alone. It swung its bone with slow precision, remembering Machoke's teachings. It learned to feel the weight of the weapon in its hand, to let its movements flow rather than jerk. At night, beneath the stars, Cubone traced circles in the dirt with its bone, stepping into stances it had practiced, letting its body grow familiar with its own power. One evening, while Cubone was practicing near a forest clearing, a sudden sound broke the stillness. Rustling leaves, snapping twigs, the unmistakable rhythm of pursuit. Cubone froze, bone lifted. A young Rattata burst through the bushes, eyes wide with terror. It skidded to a stop at Cubone's feet, trembling uncontrollably. Cubone lowered its bone. A shadow loomed behind the Rattata. A Fiaro. Tall, fierce, hungry, its sharp, eyes locked onto both Pokémon. Cubone's heart hammered. Once, this would have sent it running. But now, Cubone stepped forward. Ferrao screeched. Cubone raised its bone and swung. Not clumsily, not fearfully, with precision. The bone struck the Pharaoh's leg, clean, sharp, purposeful. Not enough to injure permanently, but enough to shock the predator. Pharaoh recoiled with a furious cry. It lunged. Cubone dodged, barely, feeling the tip of Pharaoh's beak graze the side of its mask. It steadied its stance, feet grounding into the earth. Fiero lunged again. Cubone swung upward. The bone connected with Fiero's beak in a jarring clash of force. Fiero screeched, wings flaring. It stumbled back, and it hesitated. In that hesitation, the balance shifted. Fiero saw not prey, but a defender, a protector. Fiero whipped its wings, kicked off from the ground, and disappeared into the sky with a piercing cry. Silence returned. Cubone stood panting in the clearing. Then it turned. Rattata stared up at it, trembling. Cubone lowered its bone gently. Rattata nuzzled against Cubone's leg, grateful, relieved, small. For a brief moment, Cubone saw itself in the tiny Pokémon, lost, frightened, searching for safety. Cubone tapped the ground softly, a reassurance. Rattata calmed, and when it scampered off into the bushes, Cubone felt something warm settle inside its chest. Protection, strength, courage, all the things Marowak once gave it. Cubone had begun giving to others. The realization washed over Cubone like sunlight. That night, when it looked at the stars, something in the sky felt closer, brighter, as if the universe was leaning in, whispering, "You're growing." And Cubone, for the first time in its life, felt ready for whatever came next. Cubone stood beneath the quiet sky, feeling the wind shift softly across its mask, carrying with it the faint scent of pine and cool evening air. Something inside the little Pokémon felt different now. Not larger, not louder, but steadier, like a flame that no longer flickered with every passing breeze. Cubone remained still for a long moment, letting the last remnants of adrenaline soften and dissolve within its chest. The sky overhead had deepened from a pale blue into a soft violet, the kind of color that seemed born from the quiet space between day and night. A gentle breeze swept through the clearing, rustling the tall grasses and bending them like waves bowing to the moon. The world was calm, not silent, never silent, but calm in a way that felt earned. Crickets sang at the edge of the forest. A distant hoot-hoot cooed from a tree hollow. The ground beneath Cubone's feet still held the faint imprint of its battle stance. As if the earth itself remembered the moment, Cubone breathed, slowly, steadily, and with each exhale, something inside it settled. Something that once trembled now held firm. Something that once feared now watched with awareness. It wasn't just that Cubone had defended the Rattata. It was the way it had done it, calm, focused, present. Not the frantic, desperate swings of a frightened Pokémon, but the deliberate movements of one who knew why it fought. Cubone looked down at the bone in its paw, feeling the lingering vibration from the clash with Fiero's beak. It wasn't shaking. It wasn't struggling to keep its grip. It felt aligned, almost like the bone itself recognized the growth. For a moment, Cubone imagined Marowak standing beside it, not as a ghost, not as a vision, but as a memory. Strong, steady, proud. The wind brushed past Cubone's shoulder, and for just a heartbeat, it felt like the gentle nudge she used to give. Cubone closed its eyes. A warmth pulsed faintly in its chest, not enough to trigger evolution, but enough to promise it was drawing near. As the moon rose higher, Cubone left the clearing behind, walking toward a cluster of hills that rolled softly into one another like resting giants. Each hill was dotted with tall grasses, bending under the weight of dew. Cubone's footsteps left small, temporary trails behind it, marks that would vanish by morning, erased by wind and insects and the quiet persistence of nature. Yet somehow, Cubone didn't mind the impermanence. Not everything needed to be held onto forever. Some things were meant to be lived, then released. At the crest of the tallest hill, Cubone paused. The land stretched endlessly in every direction. Forest to the east, mountains to the north, plains to the west, and a winding river to the south. Even from here, the river looked alive, reflecting the moonlight in silver ribbons. Cubone sat. It felt small against the vastness of the world. But for the first time, that smallness felt comforting rather than frightening. A reminder that it didn't need to carry everything alone. As the hours passed, Cubone's eyes grew heavy. It curled into the soft grass, hugging its bone to its chest. The skull mask tilted slightly as it settled its head, and the cool night air wrapped around it like a blanket. That night, for the first time in a long while, Cubone slept without crying. Morning arrived in soft shades of gold and rose. The sky brightened slowly, as if unwilling to intrude too quickly upon the peaceful creature sleeping on the hill. When Cubone stirred, sunlight warmed its mask, and the gentle whistle of wind brushed across its ears. Cubone stretched. Its joints popped quietly, a small reminder that even young Pokémon feel the echoes of exhaustion after long journeys. It rose to its feet, gripping its bone with renewed steadiness. Breakfast was simple. A handful of berries found near a patch of shrubs. Sweet, tangy, and just enough to fill its small stomach. Cubone wiped its mouth with the back of its paw, then began walking again. The path led downward through the hills toward a meadow bursting with wildflowers, pinks, yellows, purples, all swaying gently in the morning air. Butterfree drifted lazily above, their wings scattering shimmering powder that sparkled in the light. A group of ladybars zipped past, chattering cheerfully. The world felt alive, vibrant, welcoming. Cubone walked through the flowers, brushing against petals that tickled lightly against its legs. For a moment, it even allowed a small smile, a soft, subtle tilt of the mouth hidden beneath the mask, but real nonetheless. Halfway across the meadow, a rustle broke through the calm. Cubone turned. From between the tall flowers emerged a young Buniri, hopping nervously, looking over its shoulder as if expecting danger. Its ears were curled tight, trembling. Cubone stepped closer slowly. Buniri froze. Cubone lowered its bone, a gesture of peace. Buniri hesitated, then hopped forward, pointing frantically toward a patch of crushed flowers and scattered leaves. Cubone followed. At the edge of the meadow, a small Nidoran was trapped, one of its hind legs caught between two rocks. It struggled, whimpering in pain. Instinct pulled Cubone forward. It dropped to its knees beside the trapped Nidoran and touched the rocks gently. The poor creature flinched, trembling. Cubone tapped the ground once, a reassurance. Then it raised its bone, not to strike, to use it as a lever. Carefully, precisely, Cubone wedged the bone between the rocks and pushed with all the strength it had spent weeks building. The rocks shifted, just barely. Cubone pushed harder. Its arms shook. Its breath grew ragged. But the rocks moved. Enough! Nidoran pulled its leg free and hopped backward with a squeak of relief. Buniri rushed to its side, hugging it tightly. Cubone stepped back, bone resting against its shoulder. Nidoran limped forward and nuzzled Cubone gently, gratitude shining in its eyes. Something warm bloomed in Cubone's chest. Helping others felt good. Healing others felt powerful. The world wasn't only full of dangers, it was full of chances to be something new, something strong, something kind. Cubone continued walking that day with a new spring in its step. Not a large one, not the bounding enthusiasm of a Pikachu or the playful leaps of a Skiddo, but a subtle one, a shift, a lightness, a growing certainty that it was becoming something its mother would be proud of. And it would need that strength very soon. Because the next chapter of its journey would test it more deeply than any predator or accident could. A trial of spirit, a trial of heart, a trial that evolution often demands. Cubone was drawing near to the moment its past and future would collide. Cubone traveled onward through the meadow until the flowers thinned into tall grass, and the tall grass thinned into open, rolling land. The air grew warmer as the day stretched on, the sun hanging high and bright overhead. A flock of pidgeys soared above, their wings flickering like scattered sparks against the sky. Cubone watched them for a moment, shading its eyes with the bone. Flying, what must that feel like? To lift off the earth and drift wherever the wind allowed. Cubone couldn't imagine, but it admired the Pidgey nonetheless. Not with envy, just curiosity. There were so many ways to move through the world, and Cubone's way was one of steady steps, grounded feet, and a bone always held close. The path grew narrower as Cubone followed it toward a cluster of rock formations rising from the ground like ancient monuments. Some were smooth from years of wind polish, while others jutted at strange angles as if pressed upward by something powerful beneath the earth. Cubone approached slowly. This place felt different. Not dangerous, not safe, simply old. As if many Pokémon had passed through here, as if their stories lingered in the air. A shadow moved behind one of the stone pillars. Cubone tensed, lifting its bone defensively. But the figure that stepped into view was no predator. It was another Cubone, older, taller. Its skull mask was weathered and cracked along one edge. Its bone club bore small notches, marks of experience, battles, survival. Its stance was confident but not intimidating. It regarded Cubone with a long, quiet gaze. Then, it tapped the ground once, a greeting. Cubone hesitated, then tapped back. The older Cubone stepped closer, studying the younger one. It circled slowly, as if reading the story written in the way the smaller Cubone stood, breathed, carried its grief. Finally, it pointed toward the stone formations and let out a soft grunt. An invitation. Cubone followed. The stone formations weren't just rocks. They were something like a training ground. The older Cubone led the younger one through a maze of protruding boulders and narrow paths. Some rocks bore faint dents. Others carried scratches from claws or bone strikes. This place had seen countless battles, countless Pokémon learning to grow. The older Cubone stopped near a flat-topped boulder and placed its bone atop it. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, it struck the rock. The sound echoed, strong, steady, controlled. It motioned for the younger Cubone to try. Cubone climbed onto another rock. Its hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from something like anticipation. It raised the bone over its head and struck. The sound was weaker, less focused. The older Cubone nodded, not in disapproval, but in acknowledgement. Then it demonstrated again, its movements fluid, almost graceful. Cubone tried again, and again, and again. Hours passed. The sun drifted across the sky. Shadows lengthened. Sweat collected beneath Cubone's skull mask, trickling down its face. Its arms ached, its legs trembled, but it kept going. At one point, Cubone's bone slipped from its hands, clattering to the ground. Cubone stared at it, then reached down, picked it up, and kept practicing. The older Cubone watched silently, occasionally stepping in to adjust a stance, correct a grip, or demonstrate a technique. But mostly, it observed. Only when Cubone's arms could no longer rise did the elder lift its bone and tap the ground twice. Enough. Cubone collapsed onto the grass, breathing heavily. The older Cubone sat beside it. They watched the sky turn from blue to gold to the deepening purples of dusk. For a long time, neither moved. Cubone felt a strange comfort sitting beside another of its kind. A quiet understanding. A kinship not born of family, but of shared experience, shared struggle, shared survival. As the stars emerged, the older Cubone stood and gestured toward the horizon. A silent message. Keep going, you are ready. Then, without ceremony, the older Cubone walked away, vanishing among the stone formations as if it had never been there at all. Cubone watched it go, then stood. Its legs still trembled from the long day of training, but beneath the exhaustion was something else. Strength, real strength. Not the kind measured in force alone, but the kind shaped by perseverance. Cubone tightened its grip on its bone, and the bone felt different. Not heavier, not lighter, just more connected, as if it had grown with Cubone. Night settled deeply across the hills, a cool blanket draped over the land. Fireflies blinked in the tall grasses like tiny lanterns. A soft breeze carried the scent of earth and distant rain. Cubone walked until it found a quiet alcove between two large stones, sheltered, calm. It curled up there, bone held close, listening to the night. Something inside it thrummed. A faint glow radiated from beneath the skull mask. Evolution was not far. Cubone didn't understand how it knew. It simply knew. But evolution isn't triggered by a single moment. It rises through many. Pain, loss, courage, empathy, strength. Every step of Cubone's journey had been shaping the heart inside its tiny body, preparing it for who it would become. And the next test would be the final nudge. Cubone slept deeply beneath the stars, and when it awoke the next morning, the sky had changed. Dark clouds rolled across the horizon, thick, heavy, filled with the promise of a storm. The wind had teeth. Cubone stood. It hugged its bone close. The storm wasn't just weather. It felt like something more. A trial. Evolution was coming, but not gently. It would come the way thunder comes, sudden, powerful, transforming everything it touches. Cubone took its first step into the growing wind, and the storm answered. The wind tore across the open land with a force Cubone hadn't felt in a long time. Not since the night everything changed. But this wind was different. It wasn't carrying danger. It wasn't warning of predators or humans lurking in the shadows. It carried something far more ancient, something the world itself seemed to recognize. Change. Clouds churned overhead, dark and restless, swirling like a great beast stretching across the sky. Lightning flickered deep within them, not yet striking, but simmering, waiting. Thunder murmured far in the distance, a low and steady rumble that rolled through the ground and vibrated gently under Cubone's feet. Cubone lifted its head. Its mask caught the faint early flashes of lightning, the bone's smooth surface reflecting the sky's unrest. The skull mask felt warm today, almost humming, almost alive. That hum deepened. Cubone's chest tightened, not with fear but with anticipation, a feeling like standing at the edge of something vast, something important, something inevitable. The first drops of rain began to fall, soft at first, gentle, little taps against the bone mask, little flecks of coolness across Cubone's face. The kind of rain that feels almost like a blessing. Cubone lowered its bone, letting the rain dot its arms and shoulders. It blinked up at the sky, watching as the storm gathered strength. The winds rose, the raindrops grew heavier. The world dimmed beneath the thick canopy of clouds. Then, a roar. Not thunder, something else, something alive. Cubone spun toward the sound. Down the slope, partially obscured by sheets of rain, a large Pokémon staggered into view. A Rhydon, massive, armored, strong enough to break boulders with a swipe of its tail. But this Rhydon was injured. It limped heavily, one arm clutching its side, dark scorch marks trailing across its stone hide. It stumbled, falling to one knee, sending dirt skidding beneath it. Lightning illuminated the sky, and for a split second, Cubone saw what stalked behind the Rhydon. Two Pokémon, not wild, not free, controlled. A pair of Houndoom wearing constricting metal harnesses, devices shaped like jagged armor, etched with symbols Cubone didn't recognize. Their eyes glowed with an unnatural red, brighter and harsher than any wild flame. They growled in perfect unison, almost commanded. The harnesses. Cubone had seen something like this once before, on poachers, on the men who had chased Marowak. Cubone's grip on its bone tightened. Rain hammered the ground harder, flattening the grass, turning soil to mud. The Rhydon roared again, not in fury, but in pain. It struggled to stand, but its legs buckled beneath its weight. The Houndoom circled, predatory, merciless. Lightning split the sky. Thunder followed instantly. Cubone didn't run, not anymore. It stepped forward. The storm howled in approval. Cubone's heart pounded, not with fear, but with clarity. Everything it had learned, everything it had practiced, every moment of bravery leading up to this point suddenly aligned. This wasn't just another danger. This was a moment, a test, a chance. Cubone stepped onto the slope and tightened its stance. The Houndoom turned toward the movement. Two sets of burning red eyes locked onto the tiny figure. One barked, a sharp, vicious sound. The other snarled, flames licking the edges of its jaws. They charged. The ground trembled beneath their weight as they bounded up the slope, rain splashing beneath their paws. Cubone didn't move. It waited, just as Marowak once waited. The first Houndoom lunged. Cubone sidestepped, pivoted exactly as Machoke had taught it, and brought its bone upward in a powerful arc. The bone struck the side of the Houndoom's harness. A crack of metal, a spark, a snarl of surprise. The Houndoom stumbled sideways, skidding through mud. The second Houndoom was already mid-leap. Cubone spun, dropping low, swinging its bone in a sweeping strike. It connected with the Houndoom's leg, knocking its trajectory off course. The canine Pokémon crashed onto the wet grass, rolling before scrambling back to its feet. Thunder bellowed overhead. Cubone planted its feet. The bone in its hand glowed faintly, just a shimmer, barely visible beneath the storm's fury, but real. Something deep within Cubone flared. Power, not of anger, not of desperation, of purpose. The first Houndoom recovered, flames flickering along its fangs despite the rain. It lunged again, jaws snapping. Cubone thrust its bone forward. The clash of bone and flame exploded in a shower of sparks. The heat seared Cubone's arm, but it held. The impact pushed Cubone backward through the mud, feet digging into the earth. It gritted its teeth beneath the mask, pushing back with all its strength. And something shifted. A pulse, a glow. The skull mask lit from within. The bone warmed. The storm seemed to lean closer. Cubone roared, not a frightened cry, a battle cry, fierce, echoing, the kind Marowak once had. The force of Cubone's surge knocked the Houndoom backward. It stumbled, collapsing into the mud with a yelp. The second Houndoom circled behind Cubone. Cubone didn't look. It listened. Rain, thunder, footsteps, a growl approaching from behind, fast, low, closing in. Cubone spun, using the momentum to swing its bone in a wide arc. The impact reverberated through the storm. The Houndoom was thrown sideways, landing hard. The harness on its back sparked. The blow had cracked it. Cubone seized the moment. It raced toward the fallen Houndoom, raised its bone once more, and struck. The harness shattered. The red glow in the Houndoom's eyes flickered, then softened, then faded. Its eyes, once wild with artificial fury, blinked with confusion. It staggered to its feet, looked at Cubone, and stepped back, not in fear, in shock, as if waking from a long nightmare. The first Houndoom snarled, but Cubone was already moving, quick, precise, its bone raised. The rain intensified, falling in blurring sheets. Cubone leapt. Its bone crashed against the second harness. Metal split. The device sparked wildly. The red glow died. Both Houndoom froze. They stared at Cubone, at the cracked pieces of metal, at the freedom returned to their eyes. A rumble of thunder rolled across the sky, and then, slowly, the Houndoom bowed their heads. Gratitude, respect, recognition of a protector. Cubone lowered its bone. The Raiden in the distance let out a weary but relieved cry. The storm churned above. Lightning flashed. The air charged with raw, trembling power, and the glow beneath Cubone's skull mask surged. Bright, blinding, alive. The evolution was no longer waiting. It was here. The storm answered with thunder that shook the ground. Cubone's body lifted, not from force, but from energy rising within it. Light burst from its chest, from its limbs, from the cracks in its heart where grief once lived. The bone grew heavier in its hand. Stronger. The skull mask warmed, reshaping, transforming. Cubone cried out, not in fear, in triumph, in release. A cry that merged with the storm. Light enveloped it. The storm roared, the world held its breath, and Cubone began to evolve. The light surrounding Cubone wasn't harsh. It wasn't scorching or blinding. It was warm, radiant in a way that felt like 100 memories rising at once. The glow pulsed from deep within Cubone's small chest, spreading outward in waves that shimmered through the falling rain. Every droplet that touched the light seemed to sizzle quietly, turning to steam before vanishing into the air. Cubone felt weightless, not as if it were floating, but as if every burden it had carried, the grief, the fear, the loneliness, had been gently lifted, held by the light instead of its own tiny heart. It felt something shift inside itself, something old, something inherited, a strength that had always been there, waiting patiently beneath the surface. Cubone's fingers tightened around its bone, not from desperation, but from understanding. The bone pulsed in its grip like it recognized what was happening, like it had been waiting for this moment too. The light intensified. The storm answered with a roar of thunder that shook the earth. Cubone's silhouette blurred, its body stretching, strengthening, reshaping. Its legs lengthened, its arms grew sturdier. The skull mask expanded and widened, molding smoothly to a new shape, a new form, a new self. Energy surged through every bone, every heartbeat, every breath. And then, with a final powerful pulse of light, the glow faded, rain fell again, soft, cool. The world returned, but Cubone was no longer Cubone. It stood taller now, its body lean but strong, its tail lifted slightly behind it. The skull mask was larger, sharper around the edges, shaped like the memory of a Marowak's face. Its bone club, once small enough to drag, was now a weapon of purpose, heavy and perfectly balanced in its grip. Lightning flashed overhead, and in that split second of illumination, the creature standing beneath the storm was unmistakable. Marowak, not the same Marowak it had lost, not a replacement, but its own strength, its own identity, born from love, tempered by grief, refined through courage. The newly evolved Marowak lifted its bone, feeling the weight settle comfortably into its hand. The storm's winds whipped around it, but it no longer felt small against the world. It felt ready. The Houndoom watched from a distance. Their hostile growls were gone. Their eyes, no longer red with artificial control, held something like awe. They stepped back respectfully, lowering their heads before turning and disappearing into the rain, finally free. The injured Raiden, still breathing heavily, looked up. Its sharp eyes softened when it saw what Cubone had become. It rumbled a deep, grateful sound. Marowak stepped toward it, placing a gentle hand on its arm. The Raiden exhaled, comforted. Rain rolled down Marowak's mask, tracing along its edges in silver trails. The storm began to ease, the thunder fading into distant murmurs. The dark clouds drifted apart, revealing slivers of twilight sky. Marowak lifted its face to the fading storm, letting the rain wash over it. And for a moment, just a moment, Marowak felt something warm pass through its chest. A presence, a memory, a whisper, the faintest echo of the Marowak who once held it. You've grown. The wind carried the feeling gently away, and Marowak didn't cry. It didn't need to. It simply breathed, deeply, steadily. The storm clouds parted fully now, allowing the late evening sky to spill soft light across the land. The air smelled clean, fresh, as if the world itself had been washed. Marowak stood tall against the open horizon. It had survived. It had grown. It had become. But its journey wasn't ending here. Evolution wasn't the final chapter, only the beginning of a new one. As Marowak began to walk again, this time with steps stronger, firmer, it noticed something glinting faintly on the ground. A small shard of broken metal, one of the pieces from the shattered harness. Marowak picked it up. The shard felt cold and wrong in its hand. A reminder of cruelty, and yet also a reminder of what it had overcome. Marowak placed it gently beneath a stone, burying it in the wet earth. It didn't need to carry that weight. Not anymore. The sky deepened into early night, stars beginning to peek through the thinning clouds. The world felt vast, but now Marowak felt vast too. It walked toward the open plains, bone resting easily against its shoulder. Where once it walked with trembling fear, now it walked with purpose. Where once it hid beneath its mask, now it wore it with pride. Where once it followed, now it led. Rain dripped from the edges of its mask as the storm fully cleared, leaving the land quiet and washed clean. Marowak exhaled softly, watching its breath mist in the cooling air. And in that quiet, peaceful moment, it whispered something, so soft that even the wind had to lean in to hear it. A promise, a vow. I'm still here. The words didn't need sound, they lived in the heart. And somewhere far beyond the world of the living, a spirit smiled. Marowak walked through the quiet aftermath of the storm, each step steady on the damp earth. The scent of rain lingered like a calming memory, fresh, earthy, full of promise. Puddles reflected fragments of the clearing sky, small mirrors scattered across the ground, holding tiny pieces of sunset. Somewhere behind, the Raiden lumbered slowly towards safer ground, its injury no longer life-threatening. The newly freed Hondoom pair watched Marowak from a distance before turning away, disappearing into the tall grass where shadows softened their silhouettes. The storm had broken many things, but it had freed just as much. Marowak paused at the crest of a gently sloping hill. The landscape spread out before it in a wide open embrace. The world felt familiar and new at the same time, like returning to a place remembered only through dreams. For a long moment, Marowak simply breathed. The heaviness that once curled inside Cubone's chest was gone, replaced by something stronger, quieter, brighter. Not an absence of grief, but a transformation of it. Love reshaped into strength, pain reshaped into purpose, loss reshaped into memory. Marowak touched the skull mask, the same one Cubone had once clung to like a lifeline. Now it rested with a different weight, not a burden, a heritage. The world around it had shifted too. Pokémon nearby seemed to sense the change. Even the rustling grass and whispering wind held a different tone. A Zangoose paused mid-stride as it caught sight of Marowak, eyes flicking with acknowledgement. A distant Stantler raised its head, ears forward, before returning to grazing, unthreatened. Marowak walked on, not aimlessly. Purpose drew it forward, though it couldn't name it yet. Sometimes the heart knows where to go, long before the mind understands why. By nightfall, Marowak reached the edge of a forest. Fireflies drifted between the trees, flickering like floating embers. Their glow illuminated soft patches of moss and the faint outlines of old roots jutting up through the soil. Marowak stepped inside. The forest felt peaceful, humming with gentle life. A family of oddish slept beneath a bush. A centret curled atop a fallen log, tail wrapped around its body like a soft scarf. Above, a noctowl perched silently, watching the world with calm, half-lidded eyes. Marowak found a quiet clearing near the heart of the forest. Moonlight spilled through an opening in the canopy, creating a perfect circle of silver on the ground. It stepped into the light and sat, resting its bone against its shoulder. For a while, Marowak listened, to the sound of distant rivers, to the whisper of leaves, to the steady rhythm of its own breathing. It was peaceful, but the peace didn't last long, because something stirred, not in the trees, not in the bushes, inside. A faint warmth rising from deep within Marowak's chest. It wasn't evolution this time. It wasn't fear. It was memory, the kind that arrives without being summoned. A soft glow flickered at the edge of the clearing, dim, gentle, familiar. Not a full apparition, not a ghost, something simpler, a feeling. Marowak closed its eyes, and in the quiet space behind its eyelids, a vision appeared, not sharp, not detailed, just the outline of a mother sitting beside her child under a night sky, tapping a bone lightly against the earth in a rhythm of comfort. Tap, tap, tap. Marowak lifted its own bone and tapped the ground. Once, twice, 3 times. The rhythm echoed softly through the clearing. It wasn't a call, it wasn't a plea, it was gratitude, a way of saying, I remember. The warmth faded slowly, leaving Marowak wrapped in a serene calm. When it opened its eyes, the vision was gone, but the feeling remained. Marowak stood. The night was deep now, the sky a blanket of stars. The forest canopy framed the constellations like windows into faraway worlds. Marowak tilted its head, gazing upward as starlight danced across the surface of its mask. It felt connected to the earth beneath its feet, to the sky above, to the journey behind it, and the unknown road ahead. Marowak walked again, this time toward the forest's far edge, where tall grasses swayed under moonlight and a winding trail stretched invitingly into the distance. Halfway across the field, a rustle echoed from behind. Marowak turned. A small, timid Pokémon peeked from behind a bush. A tiny Phanpy, younger than the one Cubone had met earlier in its journey. It looked lost, scared, alone. Marowak approached slowly, lowering itself to one knee. The Phanpy stepped forward hesitantly. Marowak extended a hand. Phanpy nudged it. And suddenly, without reason or plan, Marowak understood. Its journey wasn't just about healing. It was about becoming the protector it once needed. The strength Marowak found wasn't meant to stay inside its chest. It was meant to be shared. Phanpy pressed closer. Marowak lifted its bone, tapping the ground softly. A reassurance, a promise. You're safe. Phanpy smiled, and the forest, the field, the sky, all seemed to exhale at once. Marowak led the small Pokémon forward, guiding it through the grass with slow, gentle steps. The night was no longer empty. It was alive with connection, with purpose, with new beginnings. And as they walked together beneath the starlit sky, Marowak felt its heart settle into a peace it had never known as Cubone. Not because the pain was gone, but because it had transformed into strength, into wisdom, into love. They walked together for a long while, Marowak and the tiny Phanpy. beneath a sky so full of stars it looked like someone had scattered handfuls of shimmering dust across a velvet blanket. The night air felt cool and soft against Marowak's mask, carrying the faint perfume of wildflowers that had only begun to bloom again now that the storm had passed. Fampi trotted at Marowak's side with small, hurried steps, occasionally stumbling over tufts of grass or pebbles hidden in the soil. Each time it stumbled, Marowak stopped, not impatiently, not with frustration, but with quiet presence. A gentle nudge here, a steadying hand there, anything to help the little one regain its footing. It was astonishing in a way, how natural the motions felt. Once, Marowak had been the one stumbling, confused, afraid, overwhelmed by the world's sudden vastness. It had walked alone, grieved alone, survived alone. But now, something had changed, something had shifted. The shape of its journey had stretched beyond its own healing. Marowak was no longer simply learning to stand. It was learning to guide. At the edge of the field, the land sloped downward, revealing a small pond cradled by tall reeds and smooth stones. The surface rippled gently in the night breeze, reflecting the stars like a second sky. Fampi ran ahead, splashing playfully at the water's edge. Marowak followed at a slower pace. It knelt beside the pond and gazed into the water. The reflection that looked back at it was familiar and foreign all at once. Taller, stronger. A presence marked by experiences etched into posture rather than scars. For a moment, Marowak placed its hand against the water's surface, distorting the reflection into soft waves. This world, this life, was no longer defined by what it had lost. It was defined by what it carried forward. A gentle splash interrupted Marowak's thoughts. Fampi had slipped into the water, its little legs paddling wildly as it tried to stay afloat. Marowak reacted instantly, reaching in and lifting the squealing Pokémon back onto solid ground. Fampi shook itself off like a tiny Growlithe, spraying droplets everywhere. Marowak tapped the ground lightly, a patient rhythm, but Fampi interpreted it as play. It puffed its cheeks, blew air at Marowak's mask, and hopped in a circle. Marowak sighed, a real warm, tired laugh of a sigh. Maybe guiding wasn't always solemn work. Fampi suddenly paused, ears perking. Footsteps echoed from the far side of the pond, soft, unsure, approaching slowly. Marowak shifted protectively in front of Fampi, bone raised just slightly. From between the reeds emerged a young trainer, not a poacher, not a threat, a simple traveler, a teenager with a small pack slung over one shoulder, clothing damp from the lingering humidity after the storm. Mud splattered their boots, but their eyes were gentle, wide with surprise as they froze upon seeing the Marowak. Oh, wow, the trainer whispered, barely audible. You're beautiful. Marowak didn't move. It didn't trust quickly, not anymore. But something about the trainer's gaze was steady. Kind. No greed. No malice. Only quiet respect. Fampi peeked around Marowak's legs and let out a cheerful chirp. The trainer blinked and knelt slowly. Well, hey there, they said softly, extending an open hand. Are you lost? Fampi stepped closer, sniffing the trainer's fingers with cautious enthusiasm. Marowak watched, evaluating. The trainer looked up. You protected them, didn't you? They said to Marowak. You look like you've been through a lot. Marowak's grip on its bone loosened slightly. The trainer didn't reach for a Pokeball, didn't move to capture, didn't even stand. They simply opened their bag and pulled out a container of oran berries. Would you like some? They asked gently. Fampi squeaked in excitement. Marowak hesitated, then lowered its bone. The trainer placed the berries on the ground and slid them forward, not pushing for closeness, not invading space. A soft gesture, a patient one. Marowak took one, chewed, swallowed, and felt not surprise, but gratitude. It had been a long time since kindness had been offered without cost. Fampi devoured 2 berries instantly, seeds sticking to its cheeks. The trainer laughed quietly. "You're a brave little one," they said to the tiny Pokémon. Then looking back at Marowak, "And you are something special." Marowak felt warmth bloom in its chest. Not the burning surge of evolution, not the ache of memory, but something simple, connection, potential. The trainer stood slowly. "I'm traveling east," they said. "There's a sanctuary for orphaned Pokémon near the foothills. I'm helping take some little ones there." They glanced at Fampi. "Would you like to come? Both of you?" Fampi squealed. Marowak looked at the little Pokémon, then at the trainer. The world was vast. Marowak's journey was far from over. But maybe it didn't need to walk the next stretch alone. Marowak stepped forward. A choice, an acceptance. The trainer's face softened into a grateful smile. "All right," they whispered. "Let's go together." Marowak tapped the ground once. Fampi tapped twice. The trainer laughed again, and the 3 of them, protector, child, and guide, began to walk along the winding path beside the pond. The night sky stretched above them, full of stars and endless possibility. Marowak glanced back once, not in longing, not in sadness, but in acknowledgement. Everything behind had shaped its journey. Everything ahead would shape its future. And for the first time in a long time, the road did not feel heavy. It felt open, inviting, hopeful. As Marowak walked beside its new companions, a soft breeze brushed through the clearing, lifting a faint whisper from the earth, a whisper only Marowak heard. "I'm proud of you." Marowak didn't stop, didn't turn, didn't search the shadows. It simply smiled beneath the mask, a quiet, peaceful smile, and continued forward. The path the 3 traveled wound gently through the moonlit forest, soft earth muffling their footsteps. Branches swayed overhead, leaves whispering secrets to the night as the wind rustled through them. Every so often, a scattering of starlight broke through the canopy, glimmering on Marowak's mask like tiny silver freckles. Fampi bounced ahead, occasionally circling back to nudge Marowak's leg or trumpet softly at the trainer. Its enthusiasm was a bright, warm flame flickering against the cool quiet of the night. The trainer followed with an easy pace, glancing back now and then to make sure Marowak remained comfortable. Marowak didn't trail behind, out of caution this time. It walked alongside them, balanced, present, not guarding from a distance, but sharing the journey. Somewhere far off, a river hummed against the rocks, a continuous, soothing sound that seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of the forest. The trainer led them toward its direction, knowing that water meant rest, meant morning drink, meant safety. When they reached the riverbank, dawn had begun to melt the darkness into a soft, pale blue. The first hints of sunrise stretched across the horizon, thin golden threads weaving through fading night. Fampi splashed into the river immediately, trunks sending small fountains of water upward. The trainer laughed softly and set their bag down. Marowak stepped to the water's edge. For a long moment, it watched the gentle current. Water had once meant danger. That night, rain, storm, fire, loss had carved something sharp into its memory. But this water was different, calm, slow, light, catching on ripples like dancing stars. Marowak knelt and reached out. The surface was cool beneath its fingers, smooth, alive. Fampi bumped against Marowak's side, sending droplets across the mask. Marowak tapped its bone against the ground gently, and Fampi squeaked in delight, splashing Marowak again with purposeful mischief. The trainer approached, smiling. "You know," they said softly, crouching near Marowak, I didn't expect to meet someone like you out here." They paused, studying Marowak with genuine admiration. "Some Pokémon carry strength like a weapon, but you carry it like wisdom." Marowak looked at them calmly. The trainer reached into their bag and pulled out a cloth, dipping it into the clean river water. Then, with slow, deliberate care, they offered the cloth. Marowak hesitated, then accepted. It wiped the last traces of storm mud from its arms, the cool cloth soothing against its skin. It felt cared for, a feeling it hadn't known since before the night everything changed. The trainer sat beside Marowak, legs crossed, shoes slightly wet from the river's reach. "I'm taking Phanpy to the sanctuary because they take in little ones who've been separated from their families," they said quietly. "They help them grow strong until they're ready to return to the wild, or join a trainer, or just find their own way." Marowak glanced toward the little Pokémon splashing in the shallows. The trainer followed its gaze. "I don't know what Phanpy's story is," they continued, "but it's all alone. And something tells me it's been alone long enough." Marowak nodded, a slow, thoughtful nod. They rested there for some time, the sun creeping higher, colouring the sky with gentle swaths of pink and amber. Birds emerged with soft chirps. Dew lifted from the grass in small, shimmering clouds. Eventually, Phanpy trundled back to shore, soaked and shining, and plopped against Marowak with a content sigh. The trainer stretched. "We should keep moving," they said. "The sanctuary's still a few hours away." Marowak stood, shaking droplets from its mask, gripping its bone with calm strength. They continued down the forest path, deeper into morning. As they walked, the light grew warmer, brushing the leaves with soft gold. The world woke gently. A pair of butterfree fluttered above, scattering powder like drifting snow. A deerling grazed at the edge of the trail, pausing only long enough to nod politely before returning to its breakfast. The trainer hummed as they walked, a quiet, melodic tune that blended easily with the forest's morning chorus. Phanpy trotted in zigzags, chasing butterflies it could never catch. Marowak watched them both and felt content. Not the fragile contentment that could shatter at a sudden noise, a deeper one, rooted, steady. After an hour, the trees thinned, revealing a wide valley, bathed in sunlight. At the far end of the valley, nestled between two gentle hills, stood a wooden structure with wide open windows and a peaceful garden spread across its front. The sanctuary. Warm smoke curled from a chimney. Faint laughter carried on the wind, voices human and Pokémon alike. Several young Pokémon scampered across the open grounds, Pichu chasing one another, a Slowpoke basking in a sunny patch, even a small group of Hoppip bouncing in the breeze. Phanpy gasped, then squealed, and then it ran, full speed, trunk flapping happily, feet stumbling over their own excitement. The trainer laughed and jogged after it. Marowak followed at a steady pace. When they reached the entrance, a gentle-faced woman stepped out, a caretaker with soft eyes and hands marked by years of kindness. "Well, look at you," she said to Phanpy, kneeling to meet it. "You poor thing. You've been traveling a long time, haven't you?" Phanpy nuzzled her chest, and she wrapped her arms around it. Then she rose. Her eyes met Marowak's. And for a moment, just a moment, something passed between them. Recognition, understanding, respect. "You've protected this little one," she said softly. "Thank you." Marowak tapped the ground gently, then stepped aside, letting Phanpy trot into the sanctuary garden. The caretaker turned to the trainer. "And you, thank you for bringing them." The trainer nodded. "Couldn't have done it without Marowak." The caretaker approached Marowak with slow, respectful steps. "You're welcome to stay as long as you like," she said. "Many strong Pokémon visit, to rest, to recover, or simply to remember." Marowak looked out across the sanctuary, the gentle slopes, the warm sunlight, the peaceful Pokémon. It wasn't its home, but it felt like a place where hearts grew lighter. And maybe that was enough for now. Marowak tapped its bone lightly against the earth. A soft, steady rhythm. The caretaker nodded. Stay as long as your heart needs. For the first time, Marowak walked into a peaceful place, not as a lost child, but as a guardian. The sanctuary grounds were unlike any place Marowak had ever known. Soft earth, gentle shade, the kind of quiet that wasn't heavy or sorrowful but warm, alive with small sounds that spoke of safety. Rustling leaves, distant laughter, the patter of young Pokémon paws rolling through the grass. Marowak stepped further into the garden, its bone resting loosely against its shoulder. Sunlight filtered between tree branches in scattered beams, each one catching on the edges of Marowak's mask until it looked almost gilded. Phanpy squealed as it tumbled across the grass with a group of energetic Pichu. Its earlier timidness forgotten, Marowak watched, not with worry, but with something closer to pride. The caretaker approached with a bowl of water, placing it near Marowak. "For you," she said gently. "Traveling through storms takes a toll on body and spirit." Marowak dipped its head in gratitude and drank. The water tasted crisp, cold, fresh enough to clear the mind with every swallow. When it finished, the caretaker crouched beside it. "You carry a heavy story," she said quietly. "I can see it in the way you stand, in the way you watch over that little one." Marowak didn't respond with sound. It didn't need to. The caretaker wasn't asking for words. "You're welcome to stay," she continued, brushing stray leaves from her apron. "Or to leave tomorrow, or the next day. Pokémon who come here always know when it's time." Marowak nodded. It wasn't ready to leave, not yet. The sanctuary's calm wrapped around it like a soft blanket, easing the last faint tremors of the storm within its chest. It walked slowly through the garden, pausing where young Pokémon played. A shy Buju peeked from behind a bush. Marowak gently tapped the ground once with its bone. Buju brightened, waddling forward to sniff at Marowak's foot. A pair of Natu hopped near a cluster of sun-warmed stones, their tiny heads tilting in curiosity. Marowak lowered itself to the ground to sit with them, letting them hop onto its knees and shoulders. The Pichu trio tried to climb Marowak's back, one successfully perched on its shoulder, sparking tiny bursts of static that tingled against Marowak's skin. It didn't flinch. It let them climb. For hours, Marowak moved through the garden like this, calmly, quietly, offering presence rather than power. This was what healing looked like. Not forgetting, not replacing, transforming. That evening, as the sun melted into soft orange hues, the caretaker rang a small bell. Young Pokémon gathered for dinner, excited chatter echoing across the sanctuary. Bowls were placed neatly across long wooden tables, and the trainer helped distribute fresh berries. Marowak sat near the edge of the garden, watching Phanpy eat with wide, delighted eyes. When the little Pokémon noticed Marowak watching, it trotted over with a berry held proudly in its trunk. Marowak accepted. A simple offering, a bond. Phanpy curled against Marowak's side as the sky deepened into dusk. Fireflies appeared once more, drifting lazily through the air in soft amber glows. The trainer approached quietly and sat beside Marowak. "You know," they murmured, "some Pokémon stay here for weeks, others for a single night." They leaned back on their hands, staring upward. "And some meet companions who carry them into the next chapter of their story." Marowak glanced at them. The trainer smiled. "I'm not asking you to come with me," they said gently. "Your path is yours, but if you choose to walk beside us, even for a little while, I'd be honored. Marowak looked at Fampi, snoring softly against its arm, at the caretaker guiding the Pichu inside, at the sanctuary, peaceful and safe, at the sky, deep purple now, dotted with stars. Its heart felt full, not heavy, full. It tapped the ground once. The trainer nodded with understanding. Then stay tonight, they said. Rest well. The world will wait for you. Marowak settled into the grass, laying its bone beside it. Fampi curled into a little ball against its chest. Crickets began their nighttime chorus. Leaves swayed in a lullaby rhythm. The sanctuary fell into quiet, not silence, peace. The kind of peace Marowak hadn't known since childhood. And as the moon rose high overhead, bathing everything in soft silver, Marowak finally felt something it scarcely remembered feeling. Safety, warmth, belonging. It drifted into sleep slowly, gently, carried on the soft hum of night. And somewhere, in the quiet between the wind and the stars, Marowak dreamed of grassy cliffs, of warm sunlight, of a gentle tap-tap-tap of a bone beside its tiny form, its mother's rhythm, a memory that no longer hurt, a memory that soothed, a memory that stayed. Morning found Marowak wrapped in the softest kind of silence, the kind that comes only after a night of truly restful sleep. Birds sang gently from the treetops, offering quiet greetings to the new day. A warm breeze rustled the tall grass, brushing cool air against Marowak's mask. Fampi still slept against its side, tiny trunk curled around Marowak's arm like a vine seeking something steady to hold on to. The little Pokemon's breaths were slow and peaceful, each one rising and falling with the rhythm of deep trust. Marowak rested a hand on Fampi's back. The small heartbeat beneath its palm warmed it more than sunlight ever could. Eventually, Fampi stirred and blinked awake, yawning with an adorable squeak. It bumped its forehead lightly against Marowak's chest, then stretched its tiny legs with sleepy determination. Marowak rose too, gripping its bone with familiar comfort. Today felt different, not restless, not heavy, just open. The trainer approached with 2 small bowls of breakfast, berries mixed with soft grains. For the 2 of you, they said, setting them down. Fampi dove into its bowl with dramatic enthusiasm. Marowak ate more calmly, savoring the sweetness, and noticing how much easier it felt to simply enjoy something. No shadows creeping in, no memories arriving like sudden storms, just the taste of morning. The caretaker stepped outside soon after, stretching her arms as the early sun cast long beams across the sanctuary grounds. "You 3 slept well," she said with a smile. "It's been a while since I've seen such peaceful energy around here." Fampi squeaked proudly. Marowak tapped the ground once, its gesture holding a quiet thanks. The caretaker crouched beside Marowak, brushing a hand gently against its arm. "You have a strong heart," she whispered, not as praise but as truth. "Your mother would be proud." Marowak closed its eyes. The words felt like warm light settling into the deepest parts of its chest. A soft ache and a softer healing. After breakfast, the sanctuary slowly filled with activity. Young Pokémon scattered across the garden, chasing each other or basking in comfortable patches of sunlight. The trainer helped the caretaker organize supplies, while Fampi wandered about, occasionally circling back to ensure that Marowak was still nearby. Marowak watched this gentle bustle unfold. Every smile, every laugh, every small struggle and triumph. The sanctuary wasn't a place to erase pain. It was a place where pain softened into learning, where fear transformed into trust, where loneliness melted into community. As the sun rose higher, Marowak stepped into a shaded corner of the garden. It tapped its bone lightly against the ground. Tap, tap, tap. A familiar rhythm, a memory. Fampi, hearing the sound, scampered over and sat beside Marowak, listening with eyes half-lidded, soothed by the simple beat. The trainer approached. "Teaching Phanpy a lullaby?" they asked lightly. Marowak shook its head with a small, gentle motion. Not a lullaby, a remembering, a ritual. The sanctuary settled into its nighttime quiet, a gentle hush that felt less like silence and more like a warm blanket draped across the world. Lanterns flickered softly along the wooden beams outside, their glow steady and reassuring, casting amber halos across the garden where petals lay still beneath the moon. Marowak stepped out onto the porch, the old boards creaking softly beneath its weight. But even the creaking sounded gentle here, as if the sanctuary itself whispered goodnight with every sound it made. A cool breeze drifted past, carrying with it the scent of damp soil, crushed leaves, and distant pine. For a long moment, Marowak simply stood there, bone resting loosely against its shoulder, gaze turned toward the sleeping garden. In the soft moonlight, everything seemed connected. The swaying branches, the quiet breaths of dozing Pokémon, the slow drift of clouds across the sky. Even Marowak's own heartbeat found a rhythm that matched the night. There was no rush here, no urgency, no lingering shadows of fear, only peace. Marowak took a slow breath, letting its chest rise and fall, letting the tension it didn't realize it still carried melt gradually into the evening air. Healing had come in waves, some small, some powerful. But tonight, the sanctuary gave it something it hadn't known it craved: stillness, the kind that whispers to the soul. Behind Marowak, the door slid open with a soft, wooden sigh. The trainer stepped outside, rubbing sleep from their eyes. Their hair was tousled, clothes loose and comfortable, expression warm. "Couldn't sleep?" they asked, voice low so as not to disturb the resting Pokémon. Marowak shook its head gently. The trainer moved to stand beside it, leaning lightly on the porch railing. For a while, neither spoke. The only sounds came from the rustle of leaves and the soft song of distant nocturnal Pokémon. "You know," the trainer said eventually, "some journeys end in places like this, places where you can rest for as long as you need. And some journeys start in places like this." Their voice softened. "It doesn't matter which one this is for you. Both are good." Marowak tapped its bones softly against the wood, a gentle rhythm. The trainer smiled. "I've been thinking," they murmured. "You don't have to decide whether to come with me or stay here. Not tonight, not tomorrow. But if you ever choose to walk beside me, just know you'd never walk behind me. You'd walk with me, as an equal, as a partner." Marowak considered this. It wasn't a simple decision. The world was wide, filled with both wonder and danger, but something in the trainer's voice, a steadiness, a respect, felt like an open door, not a demand, an invitation. Before Marowak could respond, a tiny squeak sounded from inside. Phanpy. The little Pokémon padded sleepily onto the porch, trunk dragging across the wooden boards, as it blinked up at Marowak with half-lidded eyes. Marowak knelt, lifting Phanpy gently and pressing its forehead to the tiny creature's head in a soft nuzzle. Phanpy squeaked again, sleepily reassured. The trainer chuckled under their breath. "Looks like someone doesn't sleep well without you." Marowak's chest warmed. It carried Phanpy back inside, laying it gently onto the haybed where it curled immediately. Tiny trunk clinging to Marowak's arm for just a second longer before finally releasing. Marowak brushed a hand over Phanpy's head, then stepped back outside. The trainer had moved a little, now sitting on the porch steps with their arms draped over their knees. They looked up as Marowak emerged. "You care a lot," they said softly. "It's rare to see that kind of heart." Marowak sat beside them. The two gazed out across the sanctuary, lit only by the faint glow of lanterns and the silver wash of moonlight. The trainer lifted their gaze to the stars. "You know," they said in a near whisper, "when I was little, I used to pretend that every star was a Pokémon watching over us. Every flicker was a memory. Every glow was a story." Marowak looked up. Stars flickered gently across the sky, each one a quiet spark in the dark. "It made me feel like even when I was alone," the trainer continued, "I never really was." Marowak listened and understood. Because once upon a time, it had been a Cubone staring at the same sky, believing it was completely alone. But now, it wasn't. The trainer leaned back on their hands. "I think sometimes the things we lose don't leave us. They just change shape." They glanced at Marowak. "Become something we carry, something that guides us in ways we don't always see." Marowak tapped the porch softly, a small, steady beat. "I don't know your whole story," the trainer whispered, "but I can see the strength that came from it." Marowak's gaze softened. The night deepened into a serene, velvety calm. Fireflies drifted near the garden fence, tiny golden lanterns flickering gently. A hoot-hoot called softly from the treetops. Somewhere nearby, a stream trickled over smooth stones. The sanctuary breathed around them, peacefully. Marowak leaned its bone against the porch railing and let its arms rest comfortably at its sides. The trainer's voice grew even softer. "If you want, I can tell you a little about where I'm going next." They hesitated. "Not to convince you, just so you know what kind of journey you'd be stepping into." Marowak nodded. The trainer smiled faintly. "There's a small village to the east. They're rebuilding their Pokémon community center after it burned down in a wildfire. Not a big one, just a tiny place that needs help." They paused. "I thought I could volunteer, bring supplies, help the caretakers there." Marowak listened. "And after that," the trainer said, "I'm heading toward the mountains. There's another sanctuary up there. Harsh weather, tough terrain, but the caretaker's getting older. They need someone young to help with winter prep." Marowak looked out into the distance, imagining snow-covered peaks, lonely trails, wild Pokémon weathering storms. The trainer turned, voice barely above a whisper. "It's not a journey of battles, not a journey of catching and collecting. It's a journey of caring, of restoring things, healing things." A pause. "And I think you'd be incredible at that." Marowak closed its eyes. The wind brushed past again, carrying the scent of pine, hay, river water, and something else. Possibility. Fampi squeaked softly in its sleep from inside. The sanctuary glowed gently. Marowak opened its eyes, tapped its bone once. A yes, not a forever yes, but a tomorrow yes. The trainer smiled, relief and gratitude warming their expression. "Then we'll leave in the morning," they whispered. Marowak nodded. It would rest one last time in the sanctuary tonight, and tomorrow it would step into a new chapter, not as the lost child it once was, but as a guardian, as a guide, as a Marowak who had walked through grief and emerged with love strong enough to share. The night deepened around them. The stars shimmered, and the sanctuary held them gently as they breathed into the quiet. End Part 3, Header. Morning drifted into the sanctuary like a soft breath, warm light settling over wooden beams and gentle gardens. Dew glistened along the grass, tiny drops clinging to each blade before sliding free and sinking quietly back into the earth. The world felt fresh, new in the way only early dawn can make it, as if every leaf and stone had been washed clean overnight. Marowak stepped out onto the porch just as the sun crested the horizon. Golden light spilled across its mask. warming the smooth bone and softening the shadows etched by years of journeying. It lifted a hand to the light, watching as it glowed gently through its fingers. Behind it, Phampi stirred from sleep, stretching with a happy squeak. The little Pokémon rolled onto its back, trunk reaching upward before flipping back onto its feet with a wobble. The trainer emerged a moment later, rubbing their eyes, hair tousled from sleep. "Morning," they said with a yawn. Marowak tapped the porch once. The sound echoed softly in the stillness. The caretaker stepped outside next, carrying a small wrapped parcel. "Before you go," she said gently, "I want you to have this." Marowak tilted its head as she placed the parcel into its hands. Inside was a small pendant carved from smooth river stone, simple but beautiful, shaped vaguely like a flame. "It's a symbol of protection," the caretaker explained, "a reminder that even in the darkest places, there is always light to carry with you, even when you think you've lost it." Marowak closed its fingers around the pendant. A warmth blossomed in its chest. Phampi squeaked and wrapped its trunk around Marowak's leg. The caretaker smiled at the scene, then turned to the trainer. "You two will make a difference," she said. "Maybe in small places, quiet ones. But those are the places that need the gentle-hearted most." The trainer nodded. "We'll do our best." They adjusted their pack, tightening the straps. "Ready?" they asked. Marowak looked out across the sanctuary, the wooden beams, the garden, the sleepy Pokémon slowly waking to morning. It had found peace here, but peace wasn't meant to be clung to. Peace was meant to be carried. Marowak tapped its bone against the floorboards. "Yes." Phampi hopped excitedly. Together, the three stepped beyond the sanctuary gates. The path ahead wound gently between hills, sunlight spilling across it like a golden ribbon. Wildflowers swayed along the trail, nodding as if greeting the travelers. The trainer walked ahead, humming softly. Phampi trotted between them, occasionally tugging at Marowak's hand with joyful chirps. Marowak followed with calm dignity, steps no longer heavy, no longer uncertain. They walked until the sanctuary faded behind them, becoming a warm memory held in the folds of their hearts. As they crossed into the open valley, the world grew quiet. Not the empty quiet of loneliness, but the settling quiet that precedes a new chapter. Marowak paused. The trainer turned. "Everything okay?" Marowak looked up at the sky, at the drifting clouds, at the morning light, at the horizon that stretched endlessly ahead. Then it tapped its bone softly against the earth. A steady, confident rhythm. The trainer smiled. "Yeah," they said softly. "Me too." They continued. The wind picked up, carrying scents of distant pines and the faint sweetness of blooming flowers. Phampi chirped happily, bounding through the tall grass. Marowak watched it go, the corners of its mouth lifting beneath the mask into a gentle smile. Everything felt right. The road wound upward, leading them to a small ridge overlooking the landscape. Forests, rivers, and meadows stretched far below, the morning sun bathing everything in soft gold. The trainer stopped. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Marowak nodded. The view wasn't just beautiful, it was vast, open, full of possibility. They took a breath together, a long, quiet breath, a breath of beginning, and Marowak felt a gentle pulse inside its chest, a warmth that wasn't evolution or battle or grief. It was love. Love carried forward, love reshaped, love shared. They descended the ridge, following the path as it curved gracefully toward the next village, the next act of kindness, the next moment waiting to unfold. Marowak didn't know what the future held, but it no longer feared it, because it understood now. Healing wasn't leaving the past behind. It was carrying it with you gently, letting it guide your steps. And Marowak walked with a heart full of memory, strength, and quiet hope. As the day warmed and the three travelers moved farther down the road, the world softened into a gentle hum, the kind of sound that cradles the mind, easing it into calm, into rest, into peace. And if you're listening to this while drifting towards sleep, feel free to let your eyes grow heavy. Let your breath sink into the rhythm of the world. Let the story settle around you like a soft blanket. And as Marowak walks into its future, may you walk gently into your dreams. Thank you for spending this time here. Thank you for resting with this story. And if you'd like more tales like this, more gentle journeys through the world of Pokémon, feel free to like, subscribe, and join us again. There's always another story waiting. Good night.